Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Can LGBTQ plus activism be used as a cover for predators? This week, Stephen Ireland, co-founder of Pride in Surrey, was convicted of raping a 12-year-old boy he met on Grindr. He was also found guilty of multiple child sex offences, including making indecent images of children. His partner, David Sutton, was convicted of possessing child abuse material and extreme pornography. Ireland was a well-known LGBTQ plus activist with ties to educational organisations. While Pride in Surrey has condemned his actions, this case raises a question. Are predators exploiting inclusive spaces to commit crimes? I'm joined now by Assistant Editor of The Critic, Jo Bartosch. Jo, hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Jo. But I know it's a very serious matter, but we have some fans who just want to say hello to you before as well. There they are. You've got your posse in tonight.
Oh, that's lovely.
Jo, you wrote an article this week for Spiked Online, which basically argues that case that I just laid out in the intro, right?
Yes. I mean, I think when you have any group of people in society who can't be questioned, whether that's priests or whether that's people who do great works for charity, like Jamie Savile, you create a problem. So, whereas once people might have been worried about being condemned to hell if they criticised a Catholic priest, I think there is now a similar sort of reverence for those who claim to be queer, whatever that means. And I also think it's entirely fair enough to ask what is actually covered by the QT+. Because, that's actually not clear. And there are some people who argue that, for example, identities like minor attractive people, which are essentially paedophiles, that they ought to be included with the TQ+. So it does attract lots of, it can cover some really nefarious groups and some really unpleasant people. And it provides some cover in the same way as religion or anything else has in the past. So we really need to be looking at these groups and making sure that we apply safeguarding rules, no matter the sort of social cost.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Exactly, that where there is this blurring of boundaries and when people want to erase safeguarding, that is really where we should be looking the closest. And of course, because we now live in a culture where you can't criticise, supposedly, like that the holy status is the LGBTQ+, then to do any criticism of them would, of course, land you being labelled a bigot. And I believe this person, Stephen Ireland, he actually had a charity called Educate and Celebrate, which went into schools and universities. And that seems very troublesome to what he might have been teaching in those places.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's darker than that somewhat. So Educate and Celebrate are now defunct, but they went into schools across the country and into nurseries even, teaching essentially what's known as queer theory. And one of their other patrons is Peter Tatchell, and he was known for writing an infamous letter in which he said, several of my friends, gay and straight, male and female, had sex with adults from the ages of 9 to 14. None feel they were abused. That was in a letter to The Guardian. He says it's misinterpreted, but I think it's there in black and white. So there are these characters who attach themselves to the QT, just in the same way as the Paedophile Information Exchange once attached itself to the LGB movement. So, we really need to be aware and we need to scrutinise these organisations. And we also need to be asking questions about what sort of person does think that a child can consent to, for example, puberty blockers? And why would they want a child to consent to taking puberty blockers? Because it keeps their bodies in a state of immaturity. So that might be a deeply unpleasant and difficult thing to tackle. But I do think we need to start asking why and who benefits from trans activism. Yeah,
well, this is the thing, is that it should be pointed out, you're not saying, I'm not saying, I don't think anybody is saying that gay people or trans people or any people are paedophiles, of course, apart from paedophiles or any other kind of, bestiality or whatever it is that might be included. But that's the issue, is the open-endedness of this Q and this plus. And by latching themselves onto the LGB, then you're going to see this problem where any criticism of one thing is suddenly taken up as a sort of a criticism of the other. And that almost seems like a deliberate thing. That's the way it's been set up.
I mean, the worst thing you can be in this society is phobic or a bigot. And it is true that, there were horrible slurs directed at gay men many years ago, which suggested that they were paedophiles. And obviously that's horrific and that's wrong. But I think that sort of cultural legacy is now a hangover. And I think activists have exploited that. And I think there are some really questionable themes running through, in particular, trans activism.
Yeah. So, because going back to a point that you were making earlier about this undefinability of the Q and the plus, I believe there was a book released a few weeks ago by a self-declared queer, someone who identifies as queer. This is under the aegis of, I think, queer theory, and they are a British fellow member and they are a professor at university, and they've released a book called Loving Animals, Bestiality, Zoophilia, something like that. And then it was even had a review in the London Book Review, which talks about how it's all about how sexual relations between animals and humans doesn't have to be abusive. And you could buy this in Waterstones. So the idea is, of course, now you might get people who identify as Q saying, no, Q just stands for this one or two things. But, of course, being open-ended, they don't get to define who actually is part of this Q, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I've just submitted a manuscript. I've co-authored a book on pornography, and I am absolutely 100% sure that pornography is driving a lot of these niche fetishes, because people go online and they become more and more immersed in their fantasies, and it takes over their lives. So I think we are seeing a huge rise in quite sort of niche and damaging and abusive behaviours that is being driven by pornography in part.
Yeah. The irony, of course, with the Stephen Ireland cases, I believe that Lisa Townsend, they tried to get her fired for saying, for sort of accusing her of being a bigot, and because she was calling out for these kind of safeguarding, and then they actually they sort of went after her to get her kicked out of her job, and then it turns out they're the ones, of course, who unfortunately are abusive towards children.
Yeah, so they, I mean, I think anyone who sort of questions people who try to bring up safeguarding concerns deserves a bit of a side eye. Okay. So they set up a specific group and reported to her.
I'm just going to have to cut you off. Jo Bartosch, thank you so much for coming. Guys, see you in a couple of minutes. We've got a great